You know how sometimes you don't realize what you have until it's gone? Well, I'm living proof of that cliche, and it's eating me alive. I'm Hannah Lawson, I'm 31, and I think I just destroyed the best relationship I've ever had because I couldn't appreciate what was right in front of me. Let me tell you how I managed to turn my loving, devoted boyfriend into a polite stranger who treats me like his landlord's daughter. 2 years ago, if you told me I'd be sitting here missing the way my boyfriend used to grab my waist when I walked past him in the kitchen, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, Caleb's constant physical attention felt like winning the lottery every single day. This man acted like I was Helen of Troy, and he was willing to launch 1,000 ships just to touch my hand. Every morning, he'd wake up, and the first thing he'd do was pull me closer, even if we'd been sleeping pressed together all night. He'd kiss my shoulder, run his hands down my back, tell me how incredible I looked, even though my hair was a disaster and I had pillow marks on my face. During the day, he couldn't walk past me without some kind of contact. A hand on my hip, fingers trailing across my shoulders, a quick squeeze when we passed each other in our tiny apartment. And yes, he got aroused easily, very easily. I could hug him goodbye in the morning and feel him getting excited, just from having me pressed against him for 30 seconds. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me while I was doing something completely mundane, like folding laundry, and there would be this look in his eyes like he was memorizing every detail. When I asked what he was looking at, he'd just grin and say, "My beautiful girlfriend who I can't believe actually exists." My sister used to roll her eyes when I'd tell her about Caleb's constant attention. "Must be exhausting being that adored," she'd say sarcastically. Her husband of 8 years barely looked up from his phone when she walked in the room, so I figured she was just jealous. I felt pretty smug about having a man who still acted like he was trying to win me over after living together for a year and a half. At work, when my colleagues would complain about their boyfriends taking them for granted or getting too comfortable, I'd just smile and think about how Caleb had texted me that morning, telling me he couldn't wait to see me later. I thought I'd figured out some secret to keeping a man interested that other women hadn't discovered yet, but then last fall, everything in my life started falling apart at once. My job at the marketing firm became absolutely hellish when they brought in new management and started demanding we work 60-hour weeks for the same pay. My dad had a heart attack in October. He's fine now, thank God. But those weeks of not knowing were torture. On top of that, my best friend since college moved across the country for her husband's job, and I was dealing with this weird grief about losing someone who'd been such a constant in my life. I was stressed, exhausted, and emotionally drained most of the time. That's when Caleb's constant physical attention started feeling less like love and more like one more demand on my already depleted energy. Every touch seemed to come with this sexual undertone that I just didn't have the bandwidth to deal with. He'd come up behind me while I was making dinner after a brutal day at work, wrap his arms around my waist, and I could feel him getting aroused just from having me against him. Or we'd be watching TV, and he'd pull me close to cuddle, and within minutes, I'd feel his body responding to mine. It was like I couldn't just exist in my own space without triggering this sexual energy from him. The thing is, Caleb never pushed me for anything. He'd get excited, sure, but he never made it my problem to solve. He'd just adjust himself quietly and go about his business. But I started feeling this weird pressure anyway, like my body was some kind of sexual trigger that I couldn't turn off. Like I couldn't just be Hannah getting comfort from her boyfriend. I was always Hannah, the sexual object that made Caleb lose his composure. I started pulling back without really realizing it. When he'd reach for me on the couch, I'd find reasons to get up. When he'd try to pull me close in bed, I'd claim I was too hot or needed to get up early. I was giving him all these signals that I needed space, but I wasn't actually communicating what was wrong. I just expected him to figure out that sometimes I needed non-sexual affection. Looking back, I can see how unfair that was. Caleb wasn't a mind reader, and his physical responses weren't something he was choosing to have. But at the time, all I could focus on was how overwhelmed I felt by what seemed like constant sexual attention, when what I needed was just comfort. The night everything exploded was in late January. I'd had the worst day imaginable at work. Our biggest client had pulled their account, and somehow management was blaming our team even though they'd been the ones pushing unrealistic timelines. I came home feeling like I was about to have a breakdown, and all I wanted was to collapse on the couch with Caleb and maybe cry about how unfair everything was. Caleb took one look at me and immediately went into caretaker mode. He made me tea, ordered dinner from my favorite Thai place, and didn't ask too many questions about what had happened. After we ate, I was finally starting to decompress when he sat down next to me on the couch and started rubbing my shoulders. It felt amazing at first, his hands working out the knots of tension in my neck and upper back. And for the first time all day, I felt like I could actually breathe. But then he leaned down and started kissing the spot where my neck meets my shoulder. This thing he'd done 1,000 times before, that usually made me melt. His hands moved from my shoulders to my arms, stroking gently, and I could feel him pressed against the back of the couch. Already getting aroused, something inside me just snapped. All the frustration from months of feeling like I couldn't get simple comfort without it turning sexual came pouring out. And I twisted around and said, "God, Caleb, do you have to sexualize everything? It's honestly disgusting how you can't touch me without getting turned on." The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was so fed up with feeling like my body was this constant sexual stimulus for him. Caleb immediately pulled his hands away and stepped back like I'd physically hurt him. His face went completely pale, and for a second we just stared at each other. "I was trying to help you relax," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to start anything, but I was already too worked up to listen to reason." "Well, your body says otherwise," I snapped. "I can't even get a shoulder rub from my own boyfriend without him getting all worked up." "It's gross, Caleb. Learn some self-control." Caleb looked at me like I'd slapped him. "I can't control how my body responds to touching you," he said. "I've never pressured you or made you feel like you had to do anything about it." He was absolutely right, but I was too defensive and frustrated to admit it. "Well, figure it out," I told him. "I'm tired of feeling like a sex object in my own relationship." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and I could see something changing in his expression. Not anger exactly, but like he was processing something painful. "Okay," he said finally, "I understand." Then he went to bed without another word. I stayed on that couch feeling justified, but also kind of sick to my stomach. Part of me knew I'd been cruel, but another part felt relieved that maybe now he'd give me some space to just exist without everything being about sex. I had no idea I'd just destroyed something precious that I'd never get back. That night, Caleb didn't reach for me in bed like he usually did. He stayed on his side, and when I woke up in the morning, he was already dressed and making coffee. No good morning kiss, no arms wrapped around me while I was still half asleep. Just a polite good morning and "do you want coffee?" I told myself it was temporary, that he was just processing what I'd said. But that was the beginning of the most painful months of my life. I'd asked for space, and Caleb gave me exactly what I'd requested. In the most literal way possible. The change was immediate and total. Caleb went from being the most physically affectionate man I'd ever known to barely touching me at all. No more random hugs during the day. No more hands on my waist when he walked past me in the kitchen. No more pulling me close while we watched TV. He'd give me a quick peck on the cheek if I initiated it. But there was no lingering, no deepening, nothing that might lead to him getting aroused and disgusting me again. At first, I actually felt relieved. Finally, I could just exist in my own apartment without feeling like every interaction had sexual undertones. I could hug my boyfriend without feeling his body respond. Could get a back rub without it turning into something more charged. It seemed like exactly what I'd wanted. But by the end of the first week, something felt horribly wrong. I was washing dishes one evening, and Caleb needed to get something from the cabinet behind me. Instead of pressing close and maybe squeezing my hip like he used to, he said, "Excuse me," and waited for me to move aside completely. It felt so formal. Like we were strangers sharing a kitchen instead of people who'd been living together for over a year. When I tried to bring it up, Caleb's explanation was so logical. It made me want to scream. "You said my physical reactions were disgusting," he said calmly. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable by getting aroused when I touch you, so I'm being more careful about physical contact." I tried to argue that it was impossible for him to show affection without ever getting excited, but Caleb just shrugged. "You're probably right," he said. "So I'm avoiding situations where that might happen." The worst part was how reasonable he sounded, like he'd thought this through and decided this was the most respectful way to handle my complaint. But it wasn't what I'd wanted at all. I'd wanted him to somehow control his body's responses, not eliminate them entirely by shutting down his desire for me. "So you're just going to punish me forever because I asked you to have some self-control," I demanded one night, after he'd politely declined to cuddle during a movie. "I'm not punishing you," he said, not even looking at me. "I'm respecting your boundaries. You made it very clear that my physical responses make you uncomfortable, so I'm making sure that doesn't happen anymore." I could hear the hurt in his voice, even though he was trying to sound neutral. That's when it started to hit me that maybe I'd gone too far. But instead of apologizing, I got defensive. Why should I have to apologize for asking my boyfriend not to get turned on every time he touched me? Why was I the bad guy for wanting normal, non-sexual affection? But here's the thing, I started missing being desired. I missed the way Caleb used to look at me like I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. I missed feeling wanted and attractive and irresistible. Now he looked at me the same way he looked at everyone else. Polite, friendly, but without that special heat that used to make me feel so special. I started trying to initiate more physical contact, hoping to spark some of that old passion. But Caleb would respond just enough to not completely reject me, then pull back before anything could get heated. It was like he was keeping himself on the tightest leash, and I hated it. 2 months in, I felt more unwanted than I ever had in our entire relationship. I'd put on his favorite dress hoping he'd compliment me, but he'd just say I looked nice in the same tone he'd used to comment on the weather. I'd try to be flirty or suggestive, but he'd just smile politely and change the subject. The irony was killing me. I'd complained about feeling sexualized, and now I felt completely desexualized. Caleb was treating me exactly like I'd asked him to, like someone he could touch without any sexual response. And it was making me miserable. By month 3, I was going crazy. Caleb had turned into this polite, distant version of himself, and I was starting to panic that I'd permanently broken something between us. He still did thoughtful things, made me coffee in the morning, asked about my day, helped with chores, but it all felt so surface level, like he was going through the motions of being a good boyfriend without any real passion behind it. I tried everything to get a reaction out of him. I'd wear his favorite lingerie under my clothes and find ways to let him catch glimpses. I'd suggest activities I knew he enjoyed. I'd cook elaborate meals and try to recreate romantic evenings we'd had before. But Caleb had apparently mastered the art of appreciating me without getting aroused by me, and it was driving me insane. The worst part was how calm he remained about everything. When I'd get frustrated and ask why he was being so distant, he'd explain in that same reasonable tone that he was just being respectful of my stated boundaries. When I'd point out that we barely had any physical intimacy anymore, he'd remind me that I'd called his natural responses disgusting, so he was trying to avoid putting me in that position again. But I didn't mean you should just shut down completely. I finally exploded one night after he'd politely declined to join me in the shower, something that used to be a regular part of our routine. Caleb looked at me with these tired eyes and said, "I don't know how to want you the way I used to without my body responding the way it always has. You can't ask me to desire you but not show that desire." So I chose not to put either of us in that uncomfortable position. I wanted to shake him. This wasn't what I'd asked for at all. I'd wanted him to control his physical responses, not eliminate them entirely by shutting down his attraction to me. But every time I tried to explain that, he'd point out that he literally couldn't control those responses. That's just how bodies work. Around month 4, Caleb had to go to a conference in Chicago for 5 days. Normally, I would have missed him desperately, and he would have called me every night wanting to talk for hours about everything and nothing. This time, our conversations were brief and surface level. He'd ask about my work, tell me a little about the sessions he'd attended, and then we'd say goodnight. No "I miss you," no flirting, no talking about how much he was looking forward to coming home to me. When he got back, something was different. Not just the same polite distance he'd been maintaining for months, but something else. He seemed more settled somehow, like he'd come to some kind of conclusion while he was away. I tried to welcome him home the way I used to, with enthusiasm and affection. But Caleb responded the same way he'd been responding to everything, briefly, politely, without real warmth. It was like hugging an acquaintance who was trying to be nice. That's when the real panic set in. I'd been telling myself this was temporary, that eventually Caleb would get over his hurt feelings and things would go back to normal. But looking at him after that trip, I realized this might be permanent. This polite, distant man who treated me like a roommate he was fond of but not passionate about. 2 days after he got back, everything came to a head. We were having dinner, one of those careful, surface-level conversations we'd been having for months, when Caleb suddenly put down his fork and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Hannah," he said quietly, "I don't think this is working anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I can't live in a relationship where my attraction to my girlfriend is seen as disgusting. And you can't live with a boyfriend whose body responds to you the way mine does. We're fundamentally incompatible now." "But that's not what I meant," I said, panic rising in my chest. I was just stressed and overwhelmed. "I didn't mean, you called my desire for you disgusting, Hannah. You said it was gross that I got aroused when I touched you. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" I started crying then, ugly, desperate tears. "I never meant to hurt you like that. I was just having a bad day and—" "It wasn't just one bad day," Caleb interrupted. "You've been pulling away from me for months. You never initiate anything, never make me feel wanted, never even tell me I'm attractive. I'm always the one pursuing, always the one showing desire, and you just tolerate it until even that became too much." He was right, and I knew it. I'd gotten so comfortable being the one who was pursued and desired that I'd never bothered to reciprocate. I'd taken his constant attention for granted and then complained when it became inconvenient. "So what?" "You're just giving up," I asked through my tears. "I'm not giving up," Caleb said sadly. "I'm accepting reality. You don't want me the way I want you, and you resent me for wanting you at all. That's not a relationship, Hannah. That's me being grateful for scraps of affection from someone who finds my love disgusting." That night, Caleb slept on the couch, and for the first time, I realized I might actually lose him. Not to another woman, but to my own inability to appreciate what I had. But even then, even facing the destruction of my relationship, part of me still thought he was overreacting. Part of me still thought this was his fault for being too sensitive about one comment I'd made during a stressful time. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Caleb wasn't just threatening to leave, he was actually doing it. He started looking at apartments, talking about breaking our lease, dividing up our stuff. The worst part was how calm he seemed about all of it, like he'd already processed the grief of losing us and moved on while I was still trying to save what we had. I tried everything. I cried. I apologized. I promised things would be different. But Caleb had this look in his eyes like he was already gone, like he'd already accepted that we were over. "I spent 4 months trying to be the boyfriend you wanted," he told me when I begged him to give us another chance. "Someone who could show you affection without desire, who could love you without wanting you. And you know what I learned? That's not love. That's just going through the motions." I started getting desperate, doing things that embarrass me to think about now. I showed up at his office trying to convince him we could work things out. I called his sister to get her to talk to him. I even considered showing up at his new apartment to beg him to come back. But the worst part was realizing that while I'd been taking his devotion for granted, I'd never really learned how to love him back. I'd never told him he was handsome on a regular basis. I'd never made him feel desired the way he'd made me feel desired every single day. I'd been so focused on receiving love that I'd forgotten to give it. My friends started asking questions when they noticed Caleb wasn't around anymore. When I tried to explain what happened, I could see them exchanging glances. Even my sister, who used to roll her eyes at Caleb's constant attention, said, "Hannah, you called him disgusting for being attracted to you. That's really harsh." Even the people closest to me were taking his side. They remembered all my complaints about Caleb being too affectionate, and now they were looking at me like I was insane for destroying something most women would kill to have. Now I'm sitting in my new studio apartment. I couldn't afford our old place on my own, scrolling through Caleb's social media like the pathetic ex-girlfriend I never thought I'd become. He looks good, really good, confident and happy in a way that makes it clear he's better off without me. He's been dating someone for the past 2 months, a graduate student named Emma who's studying environmental science. She posts pictures of them hiking and at coffee shops, always with captions about how lucky she feels or how amazing he is. The kinds of captions I never bothered with because I took Caleb's devotion for granted. In every photo, he looks like the old Caleb, the one who used to look at me like I hung the moon. Except now he's looking at someone else that way, someone who apparently appreciates being desired instead of calling it disgusting. I keep thinking about what he said about not being able to love without wanting, about how I'd asked him to do something impossible. I'd wanted him to show me affection but control his body's natural responses to that affection. I'd wanted to feel loved but not desired, comforted but not wanted. Looking back, I can see how impossible and unfair that was. But the hardest part is accepting that I did this to myself. I had a man who couldn't keep his hands off me after almost 2 years together, who made me feel like the most desirable woman in the world every single day, and I threw it away because his attraction occasionally inconvenienced me. I've been on a few dates since our breakup, and none of these men look at me the way Caleb used to. None of them seem to find me irresistible or get lost in touching me or tell me I'm beautiful every morning. I'm getting polite interest and measured attraction, the kind of moderate affection that doesn't overwhelm or inconvenience anyone. And I hate it. I miss feeling like someone's obsession. I miss being with a man who couldn't control his physical response to me because I was just that attractive to him. I miss feeling special and desired and wanted every single day. But mostly, I miss Caleb. I miss the way he used to wrap his arms around me from behind while I was making coffee. I miss waking up to his hands on my skin and his voice telling me I was beautiful. I miss feeling like the luckiest woman alive because I had someone who loved me that completely. The cruelest irony is that I finally understand what I lost, but it's too late to get it back. Caleb has found someone who appreciates his passion instead of calling it disgusting, someone who makes him feel good about wanting her. And me, I'm alone, finally understanding that being desired isn't a burden, it's a gift. Some lessons, I guess, you only learn after it's too late to matter. I called his love disgusting, and now I'd give anything to feel disgusting in that exact same way again.